May the words of my mouth and the meditation of each of our hearts be acceptable to you this day, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Zebedee looked around at the nets still to be mended. No sons to help him with the work. Employees staring at him, wondering what to do next. Then he realized he has to go home and tell his wife, "Oh dear, honey, they wandered off with Jesus." Jesus? That carpenter's son they hang out with sometimes? You mean they just left their work? Well, they'll have a lot of catching up to do when they get back tomorrow. I don't think they're coming back tomorrow. I think they may be gone a while. A while? Like a week? Longer, maybe. Longer than a week? She's mad. She blames him, he can tell. He blames himself. Things have been hard with these boys. They were never excited about the fishing biz. Zebedee inherited a boat and the love of fishing from his own father, and he's built it into something. He's found outlets for his fish in nearby towns a little farther from the coast. He's made enough money to buy another boat and hire some men to help him out. He's trained those men, and 2 of them have gone on to start their own businesses. He loves the idea of providing a service that everyone needs, good local food at a reasonable price. He sends workers to sell at restaurants, and he sells fish from a wooden table that he sets up every afternoon at the docks. Women come by at the end of the day to buy whole fish and then have him fillet it. And every day, there's product left over, some fish, an eel or 2, and he packs it up for his walk home because he knows the houses and the shacks, and he knows the people who don't even have a shack but have a little fire pit. He stops to drop something off for them. From these people, generally widows with no source of income, he takes no payment other than a smile and a thank you. Sometimes they have a loaf of bread they've made for him, and he accepts their gift in trade. Early on, Zebedee's sons went with him on these stops, and they seemed to enjoy it. But as they became teens, it annoyed them that their father stopped at the home of the poor, and they began to make excuses to go on home ahead of him. Eventually, there were no excuses even offered. They just left the boat at the end of the day and headed off without their father. But this leaving with Jesus feels different, much more long-term. They've been better, nicer now that they spend more time with Jesus. They knew him from school days. Jesus seemed to have matured faster than James and John. Zebedee likes Jesus, a young man with morals and a strength of character. Jesus often stops and talks with Zebedee at the end of the day, and sometimes he tries to help a little with the net mending. But Jesus is terrible at mending. Even so, Zebedee continues to try to teach him just so that he can hear Jesus talk while they work together. He loves the things that Jesus says about God, and he loves what he says about justice for the poor. Zebedee's sons listen too. Zebedee has noticed that they have been working harder and that they've been much more pleasant to be with, and that they've begun to accompany Zebedee at the end of the day when he takes his walks among the homes of the poor. Sometimes he even sees James put aside certain types of fish before the sales begin because certain widows love particular varieties. Finally, Zebedee has finally found the relationship that he's always wanted to have with his sons, the sons who enjoy being with him, the sons he enjoys being with, the sons who he believes could be real business partners with him, the sons who are turning into moral and just men. Then one day, this day, Jesus comes and says, "It's time, let's go." And they just follow him. They leave Zebedee with kisses, but with no tears. They seem so happy and excited. And then they're gone. Why are they so eager to go? Has he not appreciated them enough? And what about his own spiritual life? Wouldn't he love to have gone on this spiritual adventure with them? He couldn't get up and leave even if he wanted to. He has responsibilities: the boat, his home, his wife, his sons and daughters, the poor widows. Who would feed them all if he just left? The next day, after the evening meal, Zebedee goes to see his rabbi, who is actually a friend of Jesus. The two rabbis, Jesus and Josephus, have spent hours talking theology, dissecting ideas from the Torah, thinking about what God is like. Rabbi Josephus is a lot like Jesus in that they are both interested in justice, fairness, and in following God's teachings. Josephus says he wished he could have followed Jesus too, but he also has a wife and children. He has responsibilities for a congregation, a school where he teaches the boys to read. Zebedee agrees, and he names all the reasons that Josephus can't go and all the reasons that he's needed right here. If there's no local rabbi, who will perform weddings and funerals? Who will lead the high holy days or give counsel? He talks about how God doesn't call everyone to just up and go and leave their work and their family and go someplace for a week, a month, a lifetime. Josephus is silent and smiles. The words Zebedee has just spoken come back to him and to his own life. If the nets aren't mended, how will the workers fish? And if the fishing is abandoned, how will people eat? If it wasn't that Jesus' call didn't extend to Zebedee, it's that Zebedee was called to stay put, to mend the nets, to fish. The next day, Zebedee fishes, and then he sits on the dock with the workers, bending nets and talking. He misses his son so much that his chest aches. He's also a little bit more than envious of their adventurous calling. Yet his own call continues. He is mending, fishing, and feeding. He goes home at night to his wife and his other children. He stops along the way to share food with the widows. Left behind? Yes, of course. Sometimes we are left behind for a purpose: to pray, to work, to love, to do. This telling of the story from Zebedee's point of view was written by Melissa Bain-Sevier and shared with permission. Melissa is a retired Presbyterian minister from Kentucky who now works as a freelance writer and photographer. I wanted to share her story because not only is it well written and intriguing to hear from this point of view or perspective, but also because I think it speaks to a really important point. As many of you know, I struggled with the idea of ordination. And part of the reason for that is because it reinforces the notion that being called by God is something specific to ministry. But pay attention to the way that this call permeates this entire passage from Matthew. John the Baptist is called to be a forerunner for Jesus, even though it leads to his imprisonment. Jesus withdraws, but not to retreat, but rather to be intentional in listening and responding to God's call. Then Jesus calls the crowd to become a part of God's inbreaking realm before he finally calls a very few specific fishermen. There are many kinds of call here, but each is from God. This is where I think we tend to miss the point. We think that calling is about what we do rather than that we are called simply to be. Zebedee struggles initially because he isn't called to follow Jesus. He does so until he realizes that he is called to be so many other important things. A provider not only for his wife and children, but also for those in the village who need food at a reasonable price. And then for the widows who he helps to feed. He is called to be a child of God whose role matters. Maybe that's the most important point of this story, that God's call isn't simply to do something, but rather to be something, to be a child of God. Maybe this comes before the doing. It may even be that it's exactly what makes the doing possible. Even when we don't know exactly what it means to be a child of God, we need to realize that God values and honors and loves us. Realizing this, it is then that we find all the ways that we are called to do something in response. Knowing ourselves to be God's beloved children, we can trust that all of the rest will follow, whether through our work, our volunteering, or our relationships, whether individually or as a congregation called to be a place of welcome and acceptance. Maybe we're all called to stay behind, to be rather than do, to pray, to work, to love. Amen.